You found the Love Fly podcast. I'm Paul Tizard, fear-of-flying coach. I've been helping nervous flyers since 1997. And in this podcast, you will find aviation experts, enthusiasts, and also people just like you that have beaten their fears. A massive welcome to you, and thank you so much for listening. On the podcast, we welcome Phil Woods, he's got a great story to share. So without further ado, here's Phil.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. You were kind of a lifesaver for me, and my wife is probably very pleased that I found you when I did, because I think if I would have kept going with my panic attacks, I think we would have had some troubles. So very happy that I found Love Fly, and I was kind of surprised there's not more things like this out there. Because as you talk about all the time on your podcast, it's such a huge fear for so many people.
Yeah.
And you see so many statistics, but a lot of times to find those statistics, you have to go to websites that also love to talk about the few bad things that happen. And so I was just looking for podcasts, and like, there's podcasts on everything. There has to be podcasts on this. And really, there weren't that many. And the first one I listened to was the first episode you did. The first episode I listened to was for Simply Fly. And so I literally downloaded Simply Fly that day and started listening to Simply Fly. It was right when you got the free, whatever it was. Right. Yeah. So I got the free month of that. And then I pretty much have your audiobook at the end of Simply Fly memorized. So yeah, that's your, my wife knows your quotes because I say them. Yeah.
Oh God. Okay. Well, let's do rewind. This is great. That's a nice, thank you for that. Tell us about you. Tell us about your fear of flying, and just bring us up to date a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I always found when I was listening to these, mine was a little bit different. I have a lot of fears, like I don't like getting in elevators, but I've been stuck in elevators. So that's why I don't like getting in them. Like a lot of my fears come from an experience that I had that was not good. And something bad happened. So when I was a kid, I grew up in New Jersey, which, like in the US, we're right there with Philadelphia and New York City and Baltimore and Washington, D.C. It's all within a 4-hour drive. And so we would drive pretty much everywhere. We never flew. We would just drive everywhere. And really, we didn't travel outside of the Northeast except to come down to Florida. And that would be the only time that we would fly. So my first, I think I flew when I was an infant. And then the only other flight I had up through like the first 6 years of my life was to go to Disney World. Don't remember it. Why would I remember it? It doesn't, I was 6 years old. I was excited to go to Disney World. The next year, this was 1999, one of my parents' friends actually died in a commercial aviation accident. It was the Swiss Air flight that crashed over Nova Scotia. And so at 7 years old, I remember so distinctly sitting there and hearing those conversations and dealing with that. And that I remember a heck of a lot better than I remember my flight to Disney World. That's for sure. And then I think it was maybe a year or two later, and I know this was a private thing, but again, you're watching the news as a child. You don't know what you're watching. I think it was like a year or two later, JFK's Jr.'s plane crashed. And then in 2001, it was 9/11. And I grew up in the Northeast. I had been on exactly one plane ride up to that point that I can remember. And so for me, planes failed a heck of a lot more than they succeeded. And my dad worked for USAA, which is an insurance company here that's military based. And he would have to fly to San Antonio because that's where their headquarters are. And I remember so distinctly sitting at the table with my mom, my grandma, my grandpa, my dad, my sister, and myself. And, there might have been other people, but I just remember this. And them talking about, well, why don't you take the train? It's so much safer. Take the train. Wow. And this was probably around 2001, 2002, because we had all these experiences that actually directly impacted our family. Yeah. So that's where it began.
Yeah, that's quite a big beginning. Crikey.
Yeah. And it's like your podcast has been so helpful for me, and like listening and hearing more of the rational side. And I try to be a rational person, but every now and then you just get those irrational thoughts and you can't help yourself. And the one thing that I always appreciate with these people who you bring onto your podcast is they'll say the statistics, but they understand that those statistics aren't enough for some people. And the way I always looked at it was, well, statistics, my parents' friend who died in a plane crash had the exact same statistics we all have, right? I mean, that, like, to me, so I'm like, okay, well, he was the anomaly. And then everybody's always like, well, if you knew somebody who died in a commercial aviation accident, like, and you go on and on with statistics, but I didn't need the statistics. I do a lot of work with sports statistics and things like that. I know how stats work, and I know upsets happen every now and then, and I know that things can go wrong or right or whatever. And so, it was good to start to be able to hear the real things going on with planes. But going back then after, so that I can kind of like catch up to like where this real fear like really started up again. After that, family would take little trips. Again, Florida was our primary place. And then when I was a freshman in high school, which was like 2006, we flew out to Washington State. So that was the only time in my entire time before college that I went out there.
Yeah.
I then went to college at the University of Miami. So I'm flying from New Jersey to Florida all the time. I was on the cross country team at the University of Miami. So we were flying all the time. I mean, we're flying, I remember we went to Kentucky. We went back up to New Jersey, which always made me laugh. I was down at school for like a month.
Were you all right with it then?
I was fine because I started to get so used to it. I was just getting used to it. I was getting used to it. And, I'd always have, it was always like, the couple days before, I'd be like, oh man, I can't believe I have to get on a flight. But I also like to be like a creature of habit a little bit. I like my routines. I like being home. I like watching movies and TV and going on runs and bike rides. And whenever I have to go somewhere, it kind of takes me out of it. But when I was on the cross country team, I looked at it as, okay, this is work. This is what we're going to do. It's no big deal. And it never really bothered me. And I remember one flight we took coming from Louisville, Kentucky. We got a direct to Miami, Florida, which doesn't happen because on the way up, we had to go to Atlanta and then Kentucky. And we got a direct, and the entire plane was pretty much our team. We might as well have been on a private plane. And we're coming through the clouds on the way down, and we're in essentially like right on the outskirts of a thunderstorm, and we're shaking, and the whole plane is going crazy and everything like that. And I remember the whole team's joking about like, oh my God, the Miami cross country team, like what's going on while we're still up in the air, like nothing going on. And I wasn't bothered by it. I just, it didn't bother me. And then I moved to California after school. So I was constantly flying cross country to see my family and then go back home and back and forth. And I worked for an international film sales company while I was in California briefly. And that took me to Cannes and that took me to the Berlin Film Festival. And then I went around the Greek Isles and all that stuff. So like I did all that stuff, and there was always a little bit of nervousness to the flying, but never to the point of like a real issue. So now I live in Florida, and the problem with living in Florida is you can't really drive anywhere. We're in South Florida. It takes 6 hours just to get to the northern part of Florida. So you have to fly pretty much everywhere. And because my wife and I have lived all over the United States, we are constantly flying for people's weddings, for whatever's going on. Like, it's just, we have to fly everywhere.
Yes.
And so last year I had a bit of bad luck and had like a bad health issue. And I ended up having to have a surgery, and it just, obviously elevated my anxiety and all of that.
Yeah.
But about a month after the surgery was over, I got the okay to fly, and my friend was getting married in Los Angeles. And for the first time in my life, I was excited to get on a plane. And I was like, okay, this is going to be great. I can't wait. Like, I finally put this health thing behind me. I can go to my friend's wedding. I'm going to see all my old friends from Los Angeles. Like, this is going to be awesome. Flew out there, no problems at all. On the way back, we did a stop in Arizona. I know I'm giving a lot of places, but there's a whole story to it, right? We did a stop in Arizona to see my wife.
You are the perfect guest. You talk, I listen. Love it. Keep going.
So we did a stop in Arizona to see my wife's parents. So we flew. So even though the wedding, we had flown into Los Angeles, we had driven up into the mountain part of California, and we were flying from San Luis Obispo, which is a little regional airport, and we were flying to Phoenix. And so we get on this really small plane. It's the 2-2, probably like 15 rows, like nothing to it. And it's really bumpy, really turbulent. And I'm like, whatever, I'm fine. I always use the trick of look at the flight attendants, because if the flight attendants are fine, then we're fine. So I have my headphones in, I'm looking at the flight attendants, and we're about to come down, and the pilot comes on. He says, hey, it's going to be really, really bumpy on the way down. So like, everybody please return to your seats and put your seatbelts on. So with that, one flight attendant's at the front of the plane, the other's at the back. And the one in the back of the plane screams at the top of her lungs, you need to sit down right now, at the other flight attendant. as the plane is doing the thing where like, the bodies are totally shaking, people's heads are going all over. And I turned to my wife and I was like, are we actually okay right now? Or is there an actual problem? Because I had never seen a flight attendant react in that way. And then we have this really violent turbulence and nobody's coming on to be like, oh, we're fine. And the flight attendant who we were kind of near the back, the flight attendant who's in the back is still not okay. And I was like, I've never seen a flight attendant act like this. I don't know what's going on. I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like this.
Yeah.
So we land safely. Obviously, everything's fine. But I got off that plane and I was like, man, I'm kissing the ground. And that was a 45-minute flight. Like, what just happened? I can't believe this. And then we fly about a week later from Arizona to back to Miami. And I am nervous. Like now I got the real nerves. And while we're on the plane, another passenger actually had like a panic attack. And they were doing the whole thing where they got the thing and they're calling down the ground. Like we might have to divert. Like you don't know what's going on because they didn't honestly know what was going on. Yes. And then they do the whole, are there any doctors on board? And like 7 people went walking. And I'm like, okay, well, if I'm going to have anything go wrong with me here, at least I'm going to be in good hands. But, everything was fine, but I was already on such edge that by the time I'm sitting on that plane and now I'm having like a medical incident that I've never experienced on a plane before. So now I'm like, okay, my last 2 flights involved a flight attendant losing their mind as far as I'm concerned. And then a medical incident. Well, we go about 5 months and we don't have any planes. And we're supposed to fly to a wedding in Las Vegas in this past March. And in like the 2 weeks up to that, I start getting like, I can't get on this plane. I can't get on this plane. I can't get on this plane. It was bad. It was so bad. Yeah. And the day we were supposed to fly, I had a full blown panic attack. My wife was like, no, you need to get on. It's fine. Blah, blah. So I couldn't do it.
On the ground? You mean not even got to the flight?
Didn't even go to the airport. Right. Didn't even go to the airport. It was in the morning. We were supposed to take a nighttime flight. And I was so affected, I think, still by everything that had been going on. And then the fact that I did have a medical issue with myself, I was finally like coming down from that and relaxing. And all of a sudden I saw this flight as just a massive, massive stressor. And it came to no matter what somebody would say to me, statistics wise or anything like that, I would just be like, well, my parents have a friend who died in a plane crash. And like, my mind went back to 24 years ago. So that wasn't fun. Yeah, so that wasn't fun. So I didn't get on that plane.
Phil,
I know. So I didn't get on that plane, and my wife had to. It was my wife's friend, so she got to be the bad guy. I got to use me as the bad guy, but I didn't have to interact with them. And I still feel bad, and hopefully we'll see them again soon because it was the day before their wedding, so there's really not much you can do in terms of cancellation on that. And that day, I literally went on a walk. And while I was on that walk, I was just scrolling fear of flying, fear of flying, fear of flying, fear of flying, because it had always been one of those things where I would, like I said, I'd get a little nervous beforehand, but then I'd get on the plane and I'd be fine. And it was like, even if I had a nervous flight, just get me there, like whatever, and I'll be fine once I'm there. But this was finally like a breaking point for me. And I was like, okay, I need to address this and I need to figure out how I can make this better, because the fun part of this story is between the end of April of this year and July 13th of this year, we had 16 flights coming up. So I'm having a full-blown panic attack for a flight from Florida to Las Vegas in the beginning of March. And we had trips to Ohio coming up, trips to New Jersey, trips to New York, trips to Arizona, and then we had a European trip. So I had to really face this because we were invested in a lot of money into not just those flights, but the hotels, the events we were doing, everything.
Timeline clear, because you talk. This is March, yeah, and then your beginning of your 16 flights is
the end of April.
End of April. Oh, right. Wow.
Yeah. So I had a month and a half to figure this out.
Okay. Oh, this is great. Keep going.
So I had a month and a half to figure this out, and I'm like, okay, how am I going to get over this? And I'm having phone calls with my mom, who, again, this was her friend. It was her friend who died in the plane crash. Yeah. And I'm having phone calls with her and she's like, why are you being like this? Like she's flying back and forth between Florida to see me and my sister and going back to New Jersey, having no problem. She's like, why are you being like this? Like you got it. It's mind over matter. It's mind over matter. And I was like, no, I know that, but I need to find another alternative. And like I said, the first podcast I listened to, you were on with the owner of Simply Fly, or the creator of Simply Fly, whose name I can't remember. Alon, yes. And I listened to that whole podcast, and I went and I downloaded Simply Fly, and I literally watched every single thing in the next 3 days. The next 3 days, I just sat there and I watched it. And what was amazing about it is you all got into the stuff that always freaked me out on planes. And that's the stuff people don't talk about, right? Like they don't tell you about that because the headline of something going wrong is always the disaster. And then at the very last sentence, it says nobody was injured or died. And they hide that. Yes. And so, when you were talking about, well, when the plane takes off, or it was you or it was Alon, it was one or the other. And you're talking about when the plane takes off and it gets quieter. That was always something that freaked me out so much because I'm like, oh God, the engines just failed. Like something is wrong. This is it. And that wasn't the case. That's just, why would we have all that extra power that we don't need anymore? Why would we have all that noise that we don't need anymore? And to hear those things and to hear what the noises actually were, the smoke coming into the plane, which is air conditioning, blew my mind. I was like, this whole time you hear, it sounds like a dog, like barking almost. Right. And I'm like, what is this? Like, what is going on? And you just don't know about this stuff. And then to hear, if you're flying and, this is how far they're expected to be able to fly if an engine were to fail, or if this is one of the big ones that really helped me was they're constantly in communication with the ground. And if they need to divert, they know where the nearest airport is at all times. Cause for me, it was like, if something goes wrong, are they just looking for a field? Like, where are they going? Cause you don't hear about that stuff. So being able to get all of that in my head really helped. Now, the first flight I did was to Columbus, Ohio. Really drunk on that flight. That's for sure. That one was not great. I drank beforehand. I wasn't, to the point where I was falling down, but I definitely was cozy on that plane. But I was determined after that to not have that become the crutch of getting on an airplane, right? I don't need to be the person who, if I'm taking a 7 a.m. flight, I'm like, okay, why isn't the bar open yet? Because I need this. Yeah, exactly. So that flight was like that. The flight back, I was okay. And as we started going, I started getting better and better and better with it. And really just being able to calm myself down when I'm on the plane, rationalize a bit, be like, you're going to get there. It's no problem. Yeah. And then the closer we got to the flight from Florida to Portugal, because we flew to Lisbon, and then we were going from Lisbon to Munich. So really just getting to Lisbon was just because Miami, that's the easiest one to get to. That flight freaked me out because everything you had been talking about was like, oh, well, they know the diversion stuff. And I'm like, well, we're about to fly 4,500 miles over the ocean. Like, where do we divert if this happens? Like, what happens if something happens here? What happens if something happens there? My mind's racing 100 miles an hour.
So,
I did not.
Just pause a sec. That's good.
Yeah.
So you've done all that great work. And then all of a sudden, it's almost reversed because of this different scenario, yeah?
So up to that point, I had done 10 flights. 10 of the 16 flights were done before that Lisbon flight. And my wife would say, wow, you're so much better than you were. You've calmed down. Like you're not, I can tell that you're not anxious. I would sleep the night before a flight, which I wasn't doing prior to that. Even in my days where I thought I was okay. I know, it was unbelievable. When you can treat flying like a normal day, that really is such a treat, because that was never the case for me, even when I thought I was good. But building up in that 1 to Lisbon really freaked me out because I was like, we're flying over the ocean.
So just the water side of it.
It really was. It really bothered me a lot. I did not sleep on that flight from 4 p.m. until 6 a.m. Lisbon time. Somehow was still fine my entire trip in Europe. But then the other one that really bothered me when we did get to Europe, we had booked our flight through the company that we were traveling with. And I won't say who it is, but I guess they didn't have a deal with anybody who could take you directly from Budapest to Brussels. So we went Budapest to Amsterdam and then Amsterdam to Brussels.
Okay.
Which is a 22-minute flight. You're in the air for 22 minutes. That was my worst flight of the entire thing. And I think what bothered me the most was it was the small plane that had originally triggered this really big anxiety for me. And I remember when that plane landed, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And from Brussels back to JFK and then JFK down to Miami, I was calm as anything. I mean, I was actually a normal human. I watched TV. I talked to people. I ate the food they gave me without thinking I was going to die. It was unbelievable.
Ate the food. Did you use the toilet? I mean, this.
Yeah. Got up all by myself,
So that I feel like I've been on the journey with you. I've just lived through all these. So the water thing, did you get that kind of? Were you able to deal with that in the end, or was that just one of the 16 that you thought that's not so great?
That was one. So that flight, and like I said, the really small flight from Amsterdam to Brussels. Those were my really bad ones. From Miami to Lisbon, I didn't relax the entire time. I put on movies. And I'd watch 10 minutes of the movie and then I'd check the map. And then I'd watch 10 minutes of the movie and I'd check the map. And I would laugh because I forget what her name is, but you have one guest on who says she's a huge map checker. She loves to make sure. And you always say, well, that's good because the pilot needs to know that they're going the right way. And I was laughing because I'm like, man, if Paul or any of his guests saw what I was doing right now, they'd be laughing at me and making fun of me from the seat next to me. But I couldn't stop.
In a helpful way.
Yeah, well,
passion.
Yeah, but I do appreciate that you're harder about it than some people are, because sometimes it's a little too nicey nice. And I'm from the northeast part of the U.S. and we like the tough love kind of mentality. And I would love to hear you being like, thank God for you sitting in the back of the plane checking the miles per hour.
Listen, Phil, we offer a service like we'll sit next to you, we'll sit and take the piss out of you for the whole flight. No problems. It's a chargeable service. We'll be glad to offer.
It was great. I mean, and like, yeah. And it was listening to you, like, especially during, I think it was like the descent part of your Simply Fly. That one was always great for me because you'd be talking, I think you have a line in there about like, this is the most dangerous part. Of course, it's all dangerous, but this is the most dangerous part, which was the descent. And like, you're poking fun, but like you said, you are doing it with compassion. And that was something I kind of needed because I couldn't react to the super niceness, because then that was making me kind of be like, oh, like you almost feel like you're a child because you're like, well, I kind of threw a temper tantrum and now I don't have to do the thing I don't want to do. So I'm not going to do it. But I kind of needed that person to be like, get on the plane, stop overthinking it and just get on the plane. And yeah, I mean, the water one, the water definitely freaked me out. And that was the first time in my life I'd flown over water like that, because all of my other international flights had been from Los Angeles to the UK.
Right.
So you're pretty much going over land that entire flight. There's very little where you're going over. I remember the first time I did that flight, I'm like, where are we going? Like, I'm looking at the map. I'm like, he does know it's over there, right? Like, why are we going up here? But you're barely over water. And this whole flight was over water.
They didn't know anything, do they? Crikey.
Where are they? They just think they can go anyway.
Insulted you.
They think they have all total control. I'm like, guys, just go that way. I'm thinking we're going to fly over like my normal route. And then honestly, not at all. Not at all. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I know, obviously I can talk, as you've just heard, for 20 minutes and your listeners are probably exhausted and like, geez, I need a nap now too. But it was huge for me to find this. And even though I don't really like using social media, I try to avoid it like at all costs. So I don't go into really the Facebook group or anything, but I listen to these podcasts and these people who overcome the fears. And as I'm listening to it, prior to myself really being able to overcome it in that period between the panic attack and the first flight that I was going to have to get on, I would listen to these. And like, when you hear these people over like those huge moments they're overcoming, I'd be sitting there and I'm like, I'm getting emotional. And I'm like, I don't even know this person. I don't know anything about them, but like, I know how that's going to feel for me.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, and I won't tell the story about my flight from JFK to Miami, we just had an unruly passenger the entire time. But the worst flight I actually had from a something actually could have been an issue standpoint was because of an unruly passenger. It had nothing to do with the mechanical of the plane. And it wasn't like this wasn't a passenger who was going to harm anybody. It was just a passenger who was not happy to be sitting on a plane. Like, and they were wreaking havoc kind of and not listening. And it was just getting out of control. And that was my worst flight. It had nothing to do with actual aviation and me being in an unsafe place. It was just, well, this guy shut up because he's just driving everybody insane.
Yes.
And that really made me laugh because that was my last flight out of the whole entire bunch that I did.
So but that for some people would freak them out because, they would worry that what's this person going to do? Going to go and try and open the door, or they're going to attack the crew or something like that. So, you've dealt with that well. And I know what you mean. I find in fact, I find people really annoying on flight. You know, you sort of like just like pipe down. We're all here together. Just shut up. Because there's my equivalent would be going in on the London tubes or the transport, you know, and unfortunately people use their phones, and then we all have to join in their bloody work conversations, and that just drives me crazy. And so I was so upset when they put Wi-Fi on aircraft, but luckily phone calls are still banned at the moment. But you know, that side of thing just so I get it. So you've done amazing. So 14 out of the 16 flights you did really well, and you had that ropey bit with the water, which sounds like there might be a little bit of something there left, perhaps.
I would say that's probably the one, and I was so much more comfortable because we did like a whole European vacation essentially, and we ended in Brussels. And flying from Brussels to JFK, I wasn't nervous at all because to me that was like the normal route, right? I know no route is unsafe, but to me it was like, well, this is the route everybody flies all the time. You know, you could land in Iceland or Greenland or some part of Canada or Dublin or anywhere, UK. I mean, we're flying over everything, and it was so ridiculous, but that's how I kind of rationalized it with myself. But really, before that flight, what I said to myself and what I hope I can say to myself when I get on flights again, because my wife and I are far enough apart in age that my friends are getting married and her friends are getting married. And it's just like this relentless onslaught of having to fly all over the country for one day just to see our friends get married and then turn around and be like, oh my God, there goes our weekend. But, what I said,
listen to the podcast.
I tell them this straight up.
Really
I'm like,
enjoys the weddings. Thank you.
I'm like, another one, really? Another one? No, but so I said to myself, I was like, whether you're anxious or you're not, this plane is going to do what this plane is going to do.
Yeah.
This plane is going to get you from Brussels to JFK. And if there is some sort of emergency or something that happens, it is going to divert to wherever it needs to divert, whether I'm anxious or I'm just sitting here in the back of the plane. And I was so excited because I was like, it really worked. And I was so calm, and I'm like, I'm going to watch movies.
Yeah.
And then the screens on our flight weren't working properly and the movies kept freezing every 15 seconds. So
Which
I was
is
like,
a sign.
Yeah. So I was like, I guess I'm just going to sit in silence. But
that was a little test for you. Well, you've done amazing. When you think about yourself now, then, in terms of flying, I say to you right now, are you an ex-nervous flyer or a nervous flyer? What's your first response?
So I would say I'm still
hesitated.
Yeah, I'm still nervous. I am. And the thing is, I'm so relieved that as many flights as I had, because we don't travel that much. This was just a crazy circumstance of like all of this was just on top of each other. I'm very happy that's behind me. But also I'm very happy that's behind me because now like I'm at a slow time for work. Like I've had pretty much a whole month where or about 3 weeks where I've just been like hanging out and just relaxing. And it's felt good to do that. So I'm happy it's behind me. We have a bunch of stuff coming up next year. Friends getting married in Los Angeles, friends getting married in North Carolina. All that.
Invited to those. Don't worry about that.
Well, yeah, I know. No, trust me. These are people. Like I said, I already told them. I'm like, really? You're going to make me fly there? One of them's getting married in Cleveland, which I don't know if you know about Cleveland, but why would you make me fly to Cleveland for anything? But
apologies to anybody from Cleveland.
The Believe Land knows. But I'm not sitting here going, "Ooh, I'm dreading booking that flight."
Okay.
And subconsciously, I used to look for a reason to not book a flight or to not go, or what's going to happen that's going to prevent me from going. Am I going to get sick? Am I going to have a work thing that I just can't get out of? Whereas I could get out of a work thing anytime I wanted. I'm going to pretend I can't get out of it because I don't want to get on that plane.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that right now. If somebody were to say to me, hey, like, you got to fly in October and you're going to go here, part of me would be like, well, I didn't think I was going to have to travel in October, but I think it would be more of the headache of I have to travel now than the fear of actually getting on the plane, which it's funny how you phrase it, because nervous about flying, I think about myself where I couldn't sleep for a whole week up to the flight. I'd lose sleep for a whole week.
Yeah.
And then I look at myself, even when I was nervous about the Lisbon flight, I slept like a baby the night before. I'm
So
I'm almost there.
You've improved, haven't you? Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I'm on the cusp of getting there. It's just a matter of will I have that same mentality that I had on the last two flights of our trip?
That's a good question. Will you?
I know. I hope so. I hope so.
So let's roll forward then. You got this scenario coming up. Someone says, "Hey, Phil, getting married."
Yeah.
In somewhere that you'd like to go, but you're gonna have to fly to get there. It's 3 weeks from now. What would you do between now and then to be ready?
I would definitely go back and listen to these again. I think I would go into the Simply Fly and kind of listen to the tips that are in there, because every time I started to get out of control with something, I was able to go there and find the episode that had the answer. Because like I said, I listen to everything. And even when I just listen to your podcast where you talk to people will come on here. And I remember the one woman, when you had it where she could ask the other pilot any question she wanted. And she was asking him. I can't remember. I think she was from Ireland, maybe, but she had asked him, what if both pilots like got sick or something? Could the cabin crew land the plane? And you were like, what's happening to make both of these pilots get sick? Like, what is like in this small window of flight? But like listening to that episode really helped me, because there were a lot of answers to a lot of the anxieties I have. Yeah. You know, if a plane stalls, what's the plan for that? What happens in that situation? And
she carried on for another half an hour after that. I'd stopped. I thought this would be a good place to end it. And then it carried on. And then, so I was gutted. So I thought, well, that's probably some really good gold in there. There you go.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, I believe it though, because she was asking everything. And I mean,
great questions.
Those are the things that a lot of fearful flyers want to hear. Because my wife, she's the one who she just sleeps. She gets on the plane, she passes out, and I look over and I'm like clutching the armrest, and she's like unconscious on my shoulder. And I'm like, how are you doing this? How did this happen?
Rude.
It is. It's like, how did you end up passing out on this flight where I'm like shaking in my boots? And but getting those answers and having a place that I can go to now to hear the answers to those questions when an anxiety pops up, because I don't want to Google it. You Google this stuff about where do we divert if we're flying over the ocean, and it's like you divert into the ocean, and it's like, okay, that's not true. Like, you know, and every article, I mean, we had that what was it? One of the stories that really bothered me a lot, and it came after my flights to out in California back in November, was the one from Hawaii, where they were flying from Hawaii to San Francisco. And I guess in their incline, they started to decline instead. And of course, the media portrayed it as a nosedive, which it was not a nosedive. I think they fell I think it was like 2,000 feet. And by fell, I think they just were going down for 2,000 feet. Yeah. And they ended up going back up in the air and just taking off and going straight in and whatever. And then they said the pilots or something had to do extra training just to make sure they knew. It wasn't really anything that massive, but that one really bothered me, because I'm like, okay, like, can I trust the people who are even taking care of me in this situation? And then I listened to your podcast about all the training and everything that goes into this. And I was like, okay, you know, there's one incident out of millions, millions.
And that's the thing, isn't it? It's about perspective,
mm-hmm.
You know, and I heard that story. I haven't looked into the investigation, which I know there will be one, and they'll publish it. But it did make me, you know, whenever I hear something like that, I think, well, what on earth happened? I'm more curious. You know,
mm-hmm.
What on earth happened there? I know they'll find out. Some of it be changed. Nothing disastrous happened. It was one of those things where, you know, there's checks and measures to mitigate against things like that. Chances of something disastrous happening, pretty slim.
Mm-hmm.
Not 100% safe. Nothing is, but it's not far off. You know, that's about as best we can do, isn't it? This is like, life's not safe, really.
Yeah. Well, and
electrocuted talking to you now. That's
you could
probably more likely.
I mean, I live in the lightning capital of the world. Like, I'm down here in right by the Everglades, and
it's a matter of time.
It's a matter of time. I mean, but you know, my wife and I laugh because every week I host a bar trivia down here. And every week we drive on one of the most dangerous stretches of highway in America. And it's, with fatalities, crashes, all of that. I mean, every time you get on the road, you see ambulance or police because somebody got in something, whether it's a fender bender or a big crash. I drive on that road without even thinking about it. I mean, I don't even, it's not even a question. And but to fly out of the airport that is literally between my house and that road would give me so much anxiety.
Yeah. Would or will?
Would, because that airport, that was one where I was fine. We flew out of there to go up to New York and then back from New York, and I was fine on those flights. I really was okay on those.
So
it was almost
someone's passed. That one gets ticked off. That
one gets ticked off. No, it was almost like I had done really well, and I had calmed myself down, and I had rationalized well, and I had done everything I needed to do, and that transatlantic flight was the different thing that I needed for my mind to start going crazy again. Of, well, this is different than what you're used to. You're not just flying over land the entire time. Like, don't look out the window because you're just going to be like, whoa, it's the ocean, yeah. So like I feel like flying now around the United States. I think I'm pretty good because I did a lot of those flights.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was just the international one was a big one.
You're well on the way, aren't you? Let's be honest. You've done amazing stuff there. You've had quite a backstory though. But doing 16 flights in such a short time span, and also the way you approached it with like 6 weeks to really, and I think that's a good chunk of time actually. As long as you've got a good attitude towards it and don't write off the information that's coming in. I think 6 weeks is a really good time. That's why we did the 30-day program, is just to say, look, well, I reckon 30 days people can get from here to there quite significantly. And we cover all the stuff that you'd go on. If you did a whole full-day course with a flight, like they do in the UK, I don't know if they do in the US, it's the same stuff. But people have got to be ready for it. And you were clearly ready and motivated. And you did it, and you're in a better place than you were.
Yeah, and for me, it was a lot of what is the therapy where you're exposure therapy, because I didn't have a choice. I mean, it was just flight after flight after. I mean, there was I think the longest stretch we had in that entire 3-month period was 2 weeks without a flight. Like, we were flying all the time, and so I didn't really have a choice. But I didn't want to get into the point of I'm obsessing over this so much that it's actually like overwhelming my regular life. And that would happen to me sometimes, like in, back when I thought I was an okay flyer because I could get on the plane and fly from LA to Philadelphia. I thought I was fine, but I'd be obsessing for a whole week about it over and over and over again. And I do feel that a lot of that went away because of listening to your stuff and because of Simply Fly and Flight Aware, or what is it? It's not Flight Aware. What's the app?
Radar.
Flight Radar. Yeah, that one was phenomenal. Yeah. And all of that just did really, like, I was able to kind of like space it out so that it wasn't every waking moment I'm going, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And we're having a storm right now. So if my power or something cuts out, I do apologize, but we're about to get hammered with a thunderstorm. But I totally lost my train of thought. So we'll go away with it. I totally lost it because I looked out the window.
Make it later, make you sound amazing.
Yeah, there you go.
So wise there.
Yeah, please just cut that part right there.
Well, I'm going to leave it in there.
I mean, after how much,
that's how warts and all.
After how pompous I've been, you have to, right? I mean,
you haven't been pompous. All right, so now you've paused for breath.
Mm-hmm.
I love your energy, by the way. It's been great for me. My favorite guests, I ask a couple of things and they just talk. That's it. Perfect. Because at the end of the day, it's your story we want to hear. And we want to know your strategies and stuff. So we've got a sense of that. So I'm going to push you just for that last kind of bit of wisdom. Like, someone's listening to this, they're not where you are, and they're thinking, okay, what can Phil teach me about beating fear of flying? What would be your sort of main nuggets of wisdom?
My main few things is, number one would be use the resources, because there are so many and I didn't know about them. And if you're listening to this podcast now, you already know that there's resources. And like you have discovered something, and you're going to find real answers. You're going to find proper answers to questions that you have, not just, don't type in New York Times airplane crash, because you're not going to get the stuff you want to look for. Like if you want to know why something happened, or Simply Fly had a great episode about the the fatigue of you just always relate over and over again to every bad thing that happens in the world. And it's like, yes, you're human, but how much is this incident, what went on that actually made that happen, that can't potentially happen to you? It can't possibly happen here, or because there's different safety measures or just whatever it is. Use those resources so you can learn about it. Because I do think 99% of the fear comes from not knowing. And a big thing for me during this whole process, and after listening to you, I went and kind of looked into, for the first time in my life, why did the plane crash back in 1999? And it was because of like the new TV equipment they had on the plane that just like it caught fire or something. And I was like, well, that's not something that's going to happen on my plane. Like that literally can't happen. And, because you don't know, when you hear about it, you're just like, well, it just fell out of the sky.
Yeah.
Another big one, I would say is don't look for the negative information, because it's all there. And if you want it, you're going to find it. You're going to find everything bad that's ever happened.
Yeah.
Try to just kind of like rationalize the whole time of like, you are a passenger on this plane. And a big thing for me is the fear of losing control. I love to be in control of everything I do. And so you're giving up that control, but you give up that control when you sit on a bus, or you get in an Uber or a Lyft, or I don't know if that's what you have in the UK, but like, it's all the same stuff. Like you're giving up that control anytime you're not doing it. Like you're not the leader of whatever you're doing. And, that anxiety of, oh, I'm just sitting here. Well, you're just going somewhere. You're just traveling. And it did help me to look at like flight radar, because I'm seeing all those planes and I'm like, that's how many planes are in the sky. And I'm worried about my one flight. And the cabin crew on my one flight is probably on their third or fourth flight of the day on these shorter flights that we're doing around the US. Like on these like 2-hour flights. I remember the one flight we were coming down and they're like, oh, I got 2 more tonight. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm over here panicking, and they have 2 more flights. Like, this is a job. This is something people do. Very rarely is somebody going to take a job that is going to put them in danger. You have to, that's like a 1930s, 1940s mindset, of like, I have to go work on the dock, or I'm going to go build the Empire State Building because I don't have a choice. People do this job, and most of your pilots are older. They've been doing it a long time, doing a very long time. So that was kind of just like the rationalizing I would do, because the pilots are laughing and having a good time before they get on the plane.
They are.
Yeah. And I do want to say, one more thing. And this is more about the pilots. The pilots who give you the updates before it's going to be, this is like the length of time. It should be smooth. We might hit some bumps around here. There could be the chance of, it delays because we might have to circle a bit. Though that is so important. Because we I think as a society, we are so addicted to our phones and whatever we can get our hands on. And some of these flights don't have Wi-Fi. So you're up in the air and you're like, we should have landed 20 minutes ago. Why didn't we land yet? Just getting that little bit from the pilot is so comforting. It's so comforting. And we had a great, the flight from JFK down to Miami, we had a pilot who came out before the flight, and it was a Delta flight. And he's thanking her. Thank you all for choosing us. He literally walked down the entire plane and like thanked everybody. Man, I could have slept on that flight if we didn't have the unruly passenger. I could have taken a nap, because it just made me so much more comfortable. And I think that's a big thing. And I think pilots are doing it a lot more than they used to. But I do think it's very valuable to the passengers, especially the nervous ones like myself.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point, actually. You reminded me of something else that I need to pay attention to. So thank you for that. So that's on the to-do list. But Phil, that's been great, mate. Honestly, really impressed with what you've achieved. And I love the story and the backstory and what you've had to overcome to get to where you are now. And I really wish you best for all your flights coming out. You're not going to go and do more weddings now because your friends are not going to be inviting you. Sorry about that. But if you do get more flights, please let us know how you get on, particularly this water thing, whether you sort of find a way to rationalize that as well, because we'd love to hear how you get on with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely will. And thanks so much for having me on and let me have a nice 47-minute therapy session. But also thanks so much for just everything you're doing, because I see how much it's helping. It helps so many people. And it was crazy to start hearing that and being like, there's a lot of people with this fear. Yeah. But there's also a guy who's willing to sit there and listen to us all talk about it, which is great.
I love it. No, I find it much more. This is much more interesting to me. I've 20 odd years. I ran courses with, hundreds of people in the room. I didn't get a chance to really talk to people, So I really thought I get it. I feel like I get a chance to really understand people's stories and what struggles they go through. So if I ever go back to running the massive courses, it'll give me such an advantage because I'll feel like I have more empathy. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Love Fly podcast. I hope you're finding it helpful with your fear of flying. Now, if you do need some extra tailored help, you can go to our website, lovefly.co.uk, and click on the courses button. You'll find more help there, such as our 30-day program and our on-demand webinar. Thanks again. See you next time.